All right. So this, I guess, is my podcast, and so I'm going to talk about decidability. And what decidability means is there can be no asymmetrical possibilities free of explanation, or for free. Um, you kind of understand that in your everyday life. It's not something that anyone can really disagree with, because we all do it. Like if you plant seeds everywhere in a garden and they only grow in some places and not others, you can't help but ask, why here, not there? So that's an asymmetry. So there can't be any asymmetrical application of possibilities for free, meaning there has to be a reason why they grew here but they didn't grow here. So that's basically I call that decidability, and that's essentially what God is. And there's implications to that, um, because it means existence must have pre-existential explanations. Um, Otherwise, it would be undecidable, meaning there'd be no reason why it would be some way rather than another way. Any pattern, starting with what we call laws, because those are just patterns; they're not explanations, and our scientists put the patterns in a description, and they sort of pretend like they've explained something, or they invent a hidden picture, so they confuse why with how, because why would be a pre-existential explanation, meaning it's not anywhere. um, and scientists are used to thinking in how. um, so do like mechanics and doctors. They're all playing a game of finding the hidden cause from the transparent symptoms, but there's a point at which the symptoms don't have causes, like at the bottom of existence, for example. All that's really observable with a light telescope, with the best light telescopes, is just unresolvable medium with certain features. Like it reflects light in a certain way. Just like sort of what we see is just little. I think they can get down to where you can almost see like the outer cell structure or something like that. But you can't see individual molecules or anything like that. You need electron scattering or laser spectroscopy. So the bottom of existence, I know I just went off on a tangent, but here it is. But the bottom of existence is not composed of anything at all. And I'll get back to that. It's not really important right now. So we're talking about decidability. So there's no asymmetry for free, or no asymmetrical application of possibilities for free. And there has to be pre-existential explanations, but those explanations are also asymmetries, and they have to be embedded in what I call a symmetrically asymmetrical framework, so that it can precede explanation. Because like I said, we only ask for explanations when there's possibilities being excluded. And so the framework has to be symmetrical. And then I'm going to show you what that is and how it's sort of like a Rubik's Cube. What was my point? If you want to have a picture in your head of sort of what I mean by symmetrical asymmetry, even though it's just a metaphor, is the yin and yang, where you have the black side and the white side, and then there's a little bit of white in the black and a little bit of black in the white. That's what I mean. And they're invertible. You can see how they are the opposite of each other, but they're the opposite in the same way. So this is my website. Wait. So it looks like that. And if we click on here, for example, you see this entered thing, and you click on it, and I already have it opened. You'll get to this thing, and then I can explain this to you, even though I can't see it on here. I don't know if you can see this. This 3 2 3 2 4 2 3 thing. See, this 3 and 2 and this 2 and 3 are symmetrically asymmetrical. All these G's and S's mean general and specific, and some go from specific to general and some go from general to specific, and they all cancel each other. They're symmetrically asymmetrical. Everything down here, even though you don't know what I mean by all these symbols, they're all symmetrical asymmetries. And these are the number of symmetrical asymmetries, and they're also symmetrically asymmetrical. And it's all to avoid decidability, meaning it has to be symmetrical, otherwise you need a further explanation. And this is how sort of like the nature of existence precedes explanation, and you evade an infinite regress problem, or undecidability, basically. The infinite regress problem is really just a distraction. It's meant for how questions, not why questions. And this limits or makes it so it avoids the undecidability question. Meaning, if it was asymmetrical, you'd ask why it was this way rather than another way, and that would be undecidable because you don't have criteria. You don't have an explanation. So that's why it's symmetrical. Let's see. You're not going to get any of this. Take a long time to understand. It's not hard, it's just, it's not things that people are used to. So this is like we take all these symmetrical asymmetries. Other ones are like the conservation of energy and momentum. Those are two symmetrical asymmetries. And also gravitational contraction. What I mean by that is the influence. That D's not supposed to be there. If you have a massive body, a really big, well, a good example would be if you throw a ball up in the air. The real answer is that the earth and the ball are coming towards each other. It's just that one's way smaller than the other in mass, and so one moves and the other one doesn't. Or they both move. It's just that one's negligible and the other one. Basically, what I'm saying, God, this is not making any sense. The influence is in the mass are symmetrically asymmetrical, meaning the massive object is going to influence the smaller object in a symmetrically asymmetrical way that it's influencing the bigger object, if that makes any sense. Sorry, I just butchered that all, but I think you kind of get what I'm saying, hopefully. So, one of these symmetrical asymmetries are novel intervals of absence within and between intervals of presence, within unnovel intervals of existence within between intervals of non-existence. And what that all means is, so all the patterns within existence are intervals of absence and presence, like a fern or like the leaves of any plant. And the unnovelly novel part means that all the changes are smooth, meaning they're different. Each interval is different from the next, but it changes incrementally, meaning it doesn't make abrupt changes. It's gradual. And so, when I say absence within and between intervals of presence, the between part you get, but the within part, that's where I was talking earlier about how existence is not composed of anything at all at the bottom. So absence is within presence. Then the other part, this is all within novelly unnovel intervals of existence within and between intervals of non-existence. What that means is that existence comes in intervals, and it disappears, and it comes again, and it comes again. God, this is really complicated. How do I explain this? So what demarcates between intervals of existence and non-existence is experience. That means that uh, when it when all the nervous systems die out, basically existence disappears and it becomes non-existence. But technically, it just starts over. It's just that, meaning because it's saying there's existence within non-existence. That's because all the progress before experience is all symbolic, meaning it never really happens. That existence begins in progress with the first somatosensory nervous systems, like simple nervous systems, and anything before that doesn't literally exist. So that's how it starts, and then it ends, and you see it starts, and it's an eternal repetition, and that's what the novelly unnovel thing is. So it's novelly repeating because novelty itself becomes repetitive, and then it has to repeat to become new again. And so that's how it's eternal novelty. And that's an abrupt change as opposed to a gradual change. See how everything complements each other? And then see here existence, non-existence, existence, non-existence. So see how these concepts are symmetrically asymmetrical, the unnovelly novel and the novelly unnovel, and then absence and existence versus presence and non-existence. See how these are like negative positive, positive negative. They're symmetrically asymmetrical in their use. So those are just two examples. I didn't want to bog you down. That was really abstract. So there's all these symmetrical asymmetries that come in a pattern of 3, 2, 4, 2, 3, and those are all symmetrically asymmetrical. You could say, well, why isn't it the other way? Well, actually, it is the other way too. It's just used down here. This two opposing polarizations of three perpendicular orientations. That's the fact that everything's three-dimensional and has a negative and a positive. And then there's 3 levels of it. I won't go into that right now. And then that is symmetrically asymmetrical with this 3 of 2 of 3 of 2 of 3 of 2. And that's the structure of existence. And I'll show you what I mean by that. The meaning, like, there's scales and hyperscales and superscales to existence. And they come in this pattern. And they come in this pattern because it complements or is symmetrically asymmetrical with the fact that there's 2 opposing polarizations within 3 perpendicular orientations. And that's actually pre-decidable. That comes before decidability. It's the one truism. It's asymmetrical, meaning you have 2 opposing polarizations of 3 perpendicular orientations as opposed to anything else, and there's no rationale you can give for that except that it's obvious. Like if you try to imagine anything other than 3 perpendicular orientations, you can't imagine it, as well as you can't imagine more than a negative and a positive, or a negative without a positive. So that's like our ground, and then decidability operates within that, and it's within a symmetrically asymmetrical framework. And that's sort of how existence works. And there's an eternal repetition, and everything within it is novel. And let's see. You don't want to hear about that. This is sort of the bottom of existence to the top of existence. This isn't done, by the way. It looks kind of not very good. And then I blow it up. Let's skip past this. All those scales turn into these. You should look at this. All the scales come in with 3 parts, or 1 and 2, or 2 and 1. It's actually both. I'll get into that someday. The easiest one to see is like abdomen, thorax, head, organ system, organ, tissue, or outer cell, nucleus, nucleolus, tertiary, quaternary, and the network of quaternary structures, primary structure, secondary structure, tertiary structure, exon, gene, and promoter sites. So they all come in these 2 and 1s, or threes, if you want to call them that. And then those are embedded in, see, this larger three structure. And those are hyperscales. And then those are embedded in these three parts of a superscale. And then there's two superscales. And I'll show you sort of what I mean by that. So those are the three parts of the two superscales. There's one superscale and the other one, and the only difference is physical and mental. How it relates to mental and physical are different, and these are all different. And those are something else. These, what all these mean, these little symbols. I can explain those. This podcast will be, it's sort of for people that have kind of given up on everything and realized that basically everything everyone's, basically people aren't really out for understanding. They're just out to improve their power in some way, symbolic power. And there's different versions of symbolic power. And Nietzsche used to talk about this. He just called it power. But that's part of this. You can't exclude any possibilities. Because if you try to exclude any possibilities, you need criteria to exclude those possibilities. Why these possibilities are excluded and not others. And that requires an explanation, and you don't have that, so you can't do it. It'd be undecidable. So we're stuck with all the possibilities we don't like, as well as the possibilities we do like. For example, all the personality attributes need to be expressed. That's why everyone hates each other. Because we all have these different sensory and emotional preferences, different versions of pride, which are a version of symbolic power. We're all trying to get symbolic power over others. We're symbolic organisms with symbolic actions. That's what thoughts are. We're in a symbolic ecosystem, which is an economy. What I mean by symbolic organism is that it's symbolically functional. The nervous system is symbolically functional, meaning it's not literally sending messages. It's acting as if it's doing it. It's like sending a symbol of it. It doesn't actually have a code, kind of like RNA and DNA. And that's sort of, it's a symbolic version of an organism which is functional. And what I mean by functional is not that it's incidentally functional, but it's directed towards functionality. And it exploits this symmetrical asymmetry where, right here, where there's a default and an exception mode for opposite charges attract and like charges repel. I can also explain the matter-antimatter asymmetry. It's actually symmetrically asymmetrical. Like I said, conservation of energy and momentum and gravitation, they're all symmetrically asymmetrical. This 3 of 2 structure, and then dimensionality, that's all symmetrically asymmetrical. There's these other ones that are a little more complicated. Less of more difference and more of less difference. That's really important. That's talking about, one example of that is left brain versus right brain. The left hemisphere is disposed towards more of less difference. All the functions that it has are symbolic functions. And the right brain is disposed towards less of more difference. You can see this in our aesthetic differences and lots of things, and our body differences. Try to give you an example of that. Probably can't right now because I'm on the clock. Let's see. At a later date I'll explain that. Because, maybe, no, I can't do that. Anyway, so we're going down here. There's all these scales. There's scales for like core, planet, moons, radial, theta, phi, angles, core, star, planet systems are like the three parts of a galaxy.